Native Land is a local nonprofit that actually has a number you can text and it will drop the Indigenous nation whose territory you're on based on your zip code. So we thought we would take some time to learn from each other and find out. I know Pitzer is on shared Tongva territory, but you guys might be watching from other spaces, and we really want to honor all of our ancestors in the territory we're on. So take some time if you have a cell phone out, smartphone handy, and drop your tribal territory in the chat, and we can learn from each other. A lot of our tribal names have been lost, so I'm always really excited to learn new nations and new territories. Yes, Hesperia, Serrano.
And Violet, you might want to repost it in the chat because I think a few people have joined since you posted it in there. So maybe just post it one more time for the new folks.
Oseti, Sakowin, Sioux, and Wapikut land, Minneapolis. All right. So for those of you just coming in, welcome. We are just participating in a group exercise. There is a number pinned in the chat that allows you to text your zip code and they'll send back a tribal territory on which you're on based off your zip code. So we just want to take the time and learn from each other, learn what nations, what territories we currently are on. And I'm seeing, oh, here we go, Loney territory, Sunnyvale, Tamien, all right. Kijin Tongaland, yes, here we go. Wow. So it seems like it's kind of trickled down a little bit with people coming in. I think we're good to start.
All right, sounds good. Hi, everybody. My name is Trisha Morgan. I am the Managing Director of the Community Engagement Center here at Pitzer College. It's my great honor to be coming to you live from Hesperia, California, which is on Serrano land. As Violet mentioned, Pitzer and the Claremont colleges are part of Tongva land. And Violet's going to talk a little bit about that in a moment. But first, I wanted to just go ahead and introduce the awesome speaker that we have for tonight. Jessi Jumanji is a multifaceted visual artist from Memphis, Tennessee, currently residing in Los Angeles, California. With a passion for African history, nature, and otherworldly, Jessi explores the many dimensions of Afrofuturism through digital collage and painting. Being raised in the city where Martin Luther King Jr. was assassinated and having family roots in Greenwood, Mississippi, the cotton capital of the world, has given Jessi interesting viewpoint on the Black experience. Through her very own dreams and creations, Jessi Jumanji has become well known for her contemplative perspective on Black life as it is in the past, present, and future. Also, a shout out to Violet Luxton, Pitzer alumna, who coordinated this event. Violet Luxton is a Chicanx artist, poet, musician, and activist. A dyed-in-the-wool Southern Californian, she is deeply engaged in local movements for ecological and social justice and is passionate about partnering with Native communities across the region to reclaim and sustain Indigenous knowledge and culture. With a love for music, that borders on obsession, Violet is currently sharpening her skills as a performer and creator. The experience has driven her to challenge the Eurocentrism and elitism that still dominate music education. Violet's vision, a new kind of academy where Indigenous knowledge is just as valued as classical texts, and where students challenge old dogmas to redefine beauty and harmony on their own terms. When she isn't busy creating online communities for digital feminists or forging collaborations with her favorite artists, Violet loves exploring the mountains and canyons of Southern California and the homelands of her ancestors, regions she's determined to defend from development and exploitation. Violet?
Thank you, Trisha. Hello, everyone. Meiha, ekwaha, aweshkulneha, netwaniane, takorhaki sarawach. Hello, I'm happy to be here. My name is Woman Who Speaks, and I was named by Tongva elder Julia Bogany, who has taken me on as her goddaughter. My people have come from Penobscot, territory, I have Penobscot heritage on my father's side and European heritage on my father's side. And on my mother's side, I have European heritage and First Nations Indigenous heritage from Sinaloa, particularly La Brecha and Wasave, and the state of La Paz. And I am a third generation Chicana. Shout out to all my ancestors and all of your ancestors and the ancestors of the land that we currently are on. And in honor of the traditional ancestors of Pitzer College and the land that Pitzer College is on, I'm just going to read a land acknowledgement written by our elder in residence, Tongva Elder Julia Bogany. This land acknowledgement was written by Elder Bogany, and she is a member of the Tongva Gabrielino Band of Mission Indians, whose territory Pitzer stands on today. We, the indigenous people, the traditional caretakers of this landscape, are the direct descendants of the first people who formed our lands. Our world during creation time, we have always been here. Our ancestors prepared and became the landscapes, the worlds for the coming of humans, with order, knowledge, and gifts embedded in the landscape. Our ancestors imbued with responsibility and obligation to our original instructions, guided by protocol and etiquette, to be a part of, take care of, and ensure the welfare of the extended family and community, defined in its most inclusive expression, the nature and capacity of teachings and responsibilities onto our children, grandchildren, and many generations to come, and to all that now live here. In the words of the presidential candidate, Mark Charles, it is important to remember that no matter where we go within the so-called United States of America, that these lands were not discovered. You cannot discover lands that are already inhabited. It's called stealing. The fact that we refer to Columbus as the discoverer of America reveals the implicit racial bias of our nation, which is that the native people that were here were not human, and therefore the Europeans who came across the Atlantic were able to inhabit and conquer and steal these lands and thus call it discovery. I would like to take a moment to honor the four directions, the original ancestors of this land, as well as the original ancestors of the land from which you are viewing from. And as we said earlier, we did pin a number in the chat provided by the nonprofit Native Land that tells you the indigenous nation whose territory you're on when you just text your zip code. So we encourage you to drop the indigenous nation's name in the chat. I've seen people doing that, and it's so healing just seeing our native language and native nations mentioned. We're really excited to learn and heal together. And I would just like to take a moment and thank Pitzer College, my alma mater, and the Community Engagement Center and the Campus Life Committee and the Office of Black Student Affairs for partnering on this event and being so supportive throughout the entire series. And this is the first of 3 workshops, so welcome. This is part 1, meant to provide coping strategies for our current social conditions through the wisdom of African and Indigenous culture. We invite you to continue this conversation on September 1st, where we will be joined by Tongva Elder Julia Bogany for the telling of the twin sisters story and wisdom for surviving the pandemic and tough times. Long live Assata Shakur. Rest in power, Malcolm X. Rest in power, George Floyd. Rest in power, Breonna Taylor. Rest in power to all our ancestors who were taken too soon. Carlotta Lukumni. Red Cloud. Sitting Bull. Crazy Horse. Chief Joseph. Feel free to unmute and shout out your ancestors' names. Cuauhtémoc, our heroes. Frederick Douglass, Sojourner Truth, Harriet Tubman, Chief Joseph, Water Woman, Toi Perina, Azusa, Sarah Winnemucca, and all the ancestors that we have not named. We remember you. We honor you with this event. It is because of your sacrifice that we're able to be here and speak freely today. Thank you for standing up. Free Mumia Abu Jamal. Free Orlando Watley, free Leonard Peltier, Free all of our political prisoners and all of our children in detention centers, because none of us are free until all of us are free. And Black lives matter. At this time, I would like to introduce our guest of honor, artist and historian, Jessi Jumanji. Please give a warm welcome for our lovely friend, Jessi.
Hello, everyone. Again, I'm Jessi Jumanji. I'm a 30-year-old visual artist currently residing in Los Angeles by way of Memphis, Tennessee. I consider myself a lot of things, but a few things that relate to just my practice are I'm an artist, an archivist, an activist, and an Afrofuturist. These sound like just a bunch of fancy A words, but they are very simple and they work together pretty seamlessly. As an artist, I create visual representations of Black and Brown people from a creative standpoint. As an archivist, I use archives every day to find images that I use in my artwork, as well as to learn more about the history of the people that I am studying and depicting. And to be at the intersection of both art and education about Black and Brown people at times like this is an act of activism. And through this activism, we're all able to imagine a better, more beneficial and thriving future for Black and Brown people, which is where the Afrofuturism aspect ties into all of that. So Afrofuturism, I'm pretty sure many of you may or may not be familiar with the word. Most people hear the word Afro and think Africa, Black people, and then they hear futurism and think future. So it's like, cool, Black people in the future. But Afrofuturism is not just Black people in the future. It's not just Black people in space. It's not just the first Black man on the moon. It's not just Black people in Star Wars. It's a very broad and ever expanding concept of Black existence throughout time. So Afrofuturism is not just about the future, it's about the past, the present, and the future all being recognized and acknowledged at the same time to create a better concept of the present and future for Black people. So I can more easily say what Afrofuturism is not than what it is, but a few things aside from what it is, I can tell you what it does. Afrofuturism reclaims, it recontextualizes, it reimagines, and then it repositions. So reclaiming, by going through the archives and pulling these images and these information and using that to inspire a creative process, I'm then reclaiming those images and that content and giving it a new meaning to create new ideas. A lot of the earliest images that we see of Black and Brown people, African and Indigenous people, those photos and images were taken by colonizers. So a lot of images that you see of your people from decades and centuries ago, colonization was actively happening. And these people were actively being taken advantage of and being documented for that. So these photos and portraits of our people from long, long ago, they aren't from an artistic standpoint. It's from us being taken advantage of and only being seen as a specimen. So we have to acknowledge that and then honor our ancestors by recontextualizing that and separating it from the original intent, which was to just document our people as we were being removed from our lands. So with that being said, I'll go ahead and hop into a few slides in this presentation, and I'll kind of narrate through it. Can everyone see that? Violet, can you chime in if you're seeing it?
Yep, we see.
All good, coming in nicely, friend.
Okay, great. So again, I saw a great quote about what Afrofuturism is not. And this is in The Root. There's a 4-part documentary. It's called What is Afrofuturism? I'd encourage all of you guys to check that out. But the quote says, Afrofuturism is not Black sci-fi, it's not Black fantasy, it's not an easily definable artistic genre, but rather a sweeping cultural aesthetic that examines issues around Black representation, the Black future, and Black agency using music, novels, visual media, history, and myth to create something else entirely. So again, it's all encompassing of so many different things. And it's not just Black sci-fi, and it's not just Black people being pioneers in scientific or fantasy spaces. So Afrofuturism is supposed to free Black people from the constructs of society and space and time that are usually placed on us. So in my work, I'm going to start by showing you all a few pieces and examples of my work that would be considered Afrofuturism and the meaning behind those. This particular piece is called For Many Moons. In my artwork, I try to use perspective to magnify and amplify Black people in different spaces to kind of offset the underrepresentation and the misrepresentation throughout time that exists when it comes to the Black narrative and the Black experience. So I like to show Black people in a context outside of laboring for colonizers and capitalists, and to imagine what does a world and a future look like where Black people can live freely and thrive and have their contributions to science, astrology, math, medicine, technology, literature, and even the creative and intellectual contributions. How can those be honored from a new perspective? So Afrofuturism, it builds a future for Black people by deconstructing the systems of the past. And it goes back in history and pays homage to the unspoken. So in this piece, For Many Moons, I'm depicting indigenous Black women on the moon to show the importance of the contributions that ancient Black civilizations have made to math and science and the cosmos, and just our modern concept of the planets and time and space. Some of the earliest conceptions of that took place in Africa with Black and brown people. Next, this one is called Miss Universe. It depicts an indigenous African woman kind of stirring the galaxy. And this also pays homage to the many versions of creation stories that were birthed in Africa, which has been recognized as the home of the earliest people. So we can't talk about the creation of mankind without including African narratives in this story. This piece here is called Above and Beyond. It also speaks to the magnitude of Black labor throughout time and the contributions that we've made on Earth and just throughout the universe. This one is called When in Rome. It depicts an indigenous African woman kind of leaning over the Roman Colosseum. And that speaks to how our architectural contributions, people are still baffled by the pyramids and other things that we've built throughout time that have inspired civilizations after us to kind of push those limits of architecture and science as well. Aside from just labor and intelligence, I also like to just depict Black people thriving naturally in the environment. So I do a lot of work that includes not only human elements, but there's also plant life, mineral life, birds, plants, animals, and things like that kind of coexisting with Black and brown people in different spaces. So this particular piece is called Carriers. It depicts Black women of Barbados kind of carrying the planets throughout the cosmos. This is a great example of what I mean by reclaiming, recontextualizing, reimagining, and repositioning Black people through Afrofuturism. This particular picture, the original photo, depicted women of Barbados harvesting crops, and this was pretty much slave labor. A lot of times when it comes to Black history for Black people in America, we are just taught about the slave trade and then the trials and tribulations that we have worked through to overcome dealing with colonization and racism in America. However, what a lot of Black and brown people don't know is that even before the slave trade happened in America, it was taking place in different countries. And a bulk of those slaves who were being stolen from Africa, a lot of those did not end up in America. A bulk of them ended up in other islands and continents, such as Barbados. And Barbados was kind of a blueprint for how slavery and colonization was carried out in America. By the end of the 16th century, 80% of Barbados inhabitants were Africans, and they enforced a racial hierarchy, and the 1% of whites on top pretty much ruled the masses of Black workers on the bottom. And a lot of those slave owners in Barbados then took their business to America and expanded the slave trade as we know it there. And this was all taking place as early as the 16 and 1700s. Another thing, there's a lot of untold narratives about Black people's contributions to science and technology. One of the biggest examples is the telephone. A lot of people credit Alexander Graham Bell, a white man, for the invention of the telephone. However, one of the very first iterations of a telephone was created in Africa. And this particular excerpt is from a book written in the mid-1800s. And this white colonizer or explorer is telling his account of seeing indigenous people with pretty much small telephone devices from carved wood and buckskins, pretty much a tiny drum and a string, and it could transmit voices over 100 yards. So hundreds of feet away, people were able to communicate with this small piece of simple technology invented by Africans. Then that inspired later iterations of the telephone and the cell phone as we know it. And even the telephone was revolutionized by a Black man who invented the gamma electric cell, which converts radiation into electricity. And this technology pretty much made cell phones possible. But again, that's something you'll never hear in history books. Aside from science, even in our folklore and creative spaces, media and cinema, Black people and African people have been heavily inspiring a lot of things, especially Disney. Disney owes a lot of its catalog to African people, but that's a whole different conversation. So I'll just start with this one example. Just a moment. Is everyone hearing me okay?
Yes.
Loud and clear.
Okay, great. So Disney is remaking Peter Pan, and they are featuring a Black main character for Peter Pan, Joshua Mack. This has been a very controversial move, as always, is when popular characters are depicted as Black people. However, if we were all in reality, Peter Pan, Tinkerbell, and Neverland and all of its inhabitants would be Black people. The word fairy actually derives from the African word fari, which is used to describe the Tiki, Batwa, Aka, Obongo, and other dwarf races of Africa. Colonizers have pretty much generalized these people as pygmies, but they are from a spectrum of different dwarf races of Africa that can be found in different parts of Africa. These tiny people inhabited areas deep in the forest, and they made huts from foliage, and they moved quickly. They were very elusive, very similar to how fairies are depicted, like Tinkerbell in the foliage huts. Do you ever wonder why fairies have sparkly gold dust? The Fari dwarfs of Africa were known to be gold miners and often sifted the sands for gold particles. Yet another example of how Black labor for the benefit of colonizers is being unspoken and underrepresented, and then turned into a narrative of fancy and child folklore. There's even a part in Neverland, if you pay attention in the movies, that's called the Tiki Forest and is named after the Tiki dwarfs of Africa. And Tinkerbell sounds very close to Tiki Bell, which would loosely mean beautiful dwarf woman. The people of Neverland, they are said to never grow up because of the childlike stature of dwarf races. And many were never said to grow larger than the size of a small child. There's more examples from the 1800s of accounts of encounters with the dwarf people. They're described as having merry, impish ways. The Central African pygmies cannot but be struck by their singular resemblance in character to elves, gnomes, and sprites of our nursery stories. Another example of African contributions to just our folklore and traditions in America, how many of you guys knew that the stork was Black? The stork is based on African spirituality. The ancient Egyptians worshiped the sacred ibis, which is a species of storks, as a symbol of fertility. Pharaohs would have them in their temples. It was a very high regarded bird. They were allowed to roam free. And they were considered a majestic bird because they only appeared at the time that the Nile was at its highest point, which was pretty much at the end of the drought, and it would be restoring life to the area. So the stork thus represents fertility and new life, which is why it is a symbol of birth and fertility and delivering babies. So to kind of give you a perspective on the contributions that Black people have added to society across the board, let's talk about how we give, because of colonization and white supremacy and very Eurocentric views of history and everything, there's kind of a code switching that goes on when people talk about Black and brown people. So let's define ghetto. Ghetto is defined as a part of a city, especially a slum area occupied by a minority group or groups. Indigenous is defined as originating or naturally occurring in a particular place, or native. In America, indigenous populations are constantly referred to and depicted as the minority. So people often use the word ghetto and indigenous interchangeably when referring to Black and brown people, which discredits the cultural significance of it. Another kind of hot word is urban, which is defined as denoting popular Black culture in general. Native is defined as a non-white original inhabitant of a place as regarded by European colonists. So if Black is non-white and it's from a Eurocentric standpoint, we can assume that a lot of times urban culture is a blanket term for Native, Black, and brown culture. Another word that's often used against Black and brown people is poor, which is defined as worse than usual, expected, or desirable, of low or inferior standard or quality, rather than referring to them as underprivileged, which they are by way of systems of white supremacy and colonization. Underprivileged is defined as not enjoying the same standard of living and rights as the majority of people in a society. And when the majority of people in a society are white and racist, then our perspective is skewed. So let's try to think of those words in a different light. So I think of Afrofuturism as a cultural continuum. I've broken it down into 3 sections that we'll kind of explore really quickly. The first is genetic, kinetic, and aesthetic. Genetic is relating to or arising from a common origin, specifically speaking to DNA, phenotypes, physical attributes, and I will show you a series called Distant Relatives that I created, which juxtaposes very old pictures of indigenous Africans versus modern Black people in pop culture. Next is kinetic, which means relating to or resulting from motion. So you'll see culture in motion through dance and stance. So dance is, of course, dance and music, and stance refers to like positioning and posture similarities. Aesthetic is concerned with the beauty or the appreciation of beauty in relation to fashion, hair, adornments, and other visual aesthetic things. So the first example I have of genetic Afrofuturism is shown here in this distant relative series. First, we have from 1920 to 2016. Most of these images are almost 100 years apart. So we have a Baralong tribesman of South Africa versus Shannon Sharp. You see a lot of similarities in the shape of their nose, their eyes, their jawline, even their similarities in the shape of their hairline. Next, we have an Eritrean girl versus rapper Rhapsody. See, again, a lot of similarities in the shape of the eyes, the mouth, the nose, even the hoop earrings. Next, we have Ubangi Shari man of Central Africa versus actor Keith David. Lots of similarities in just the expression on their face, the lines in the forehead, the nose, the lips, and even the grooming of the facial hair with the goatee shape. Here we have an Algerian woman versus the actress Kyla Pratt. Again, a lot of striking similarities in their facial features, which implies some type of genetic connection throughout time. Here we have a native of Angola, looking very similar to the actor Don Cheadle. We have a Congolese woman versus actress Yolanda Ross. These images are almost 110 years apart. You can see similarities in like their jawbone structure, kind of the flatness of the face and the pronounced chin. Even men and women have visual similarities. This is a Madagascar native versus the actor Wesley Snipes. You can see similarities in the shape of the nose, the kind of like the turned down angle of the top lip, even the glow in their eyes almost. Here we have an Algerian woman versus the actor Dion Richmond. You may recognize him from his youth. He was the little boy on the Cosby Show named Bud. Then we have an Ethiopian man versus singer Aaron Ray. Even like their similarities in like the way their lips are curled and the shape of the nostrils and their jawline. Even to having some type of adornment on their head. He has like a crown thing, and then Aaron here has like a do-rag. Here is a Fula woman of Dakar, Senegal versus actress Leslie Jones. These images are exactly a century apart. There's even, aside from the facial similarities of like the nose, the mouth, they both have necklaces on as well as like the dangling earring style. So not only are we looking alike, we're also adorning ourselves similarly throughout time. Here we have another Madagascar native versus the actress Danielle Brooks. This distant relative series has been going on for me for the past few years. It's been an ongoing project. This is just a small section of it, and I have over 100. If you check out Facebook or Instagram, you can see the full series. And I not only study celebrities, I even went so far as to start studying the genetic similarities in people that I know. This person is actually my cousin on the right, Doug Hansbrough. This picture was taken in the 2010s, and the picture on the left is a Congolese man from 1920. And there's very much similarities in the wrinkles in the eyebrows and the lines around the mouth and even how they hold their mouths. So just speaks a lot to, although there is a huge disconnect as far as knowing exactly what tribe or where in Africa we came from, there are still these subtle nuances that still exist throughout time. So after genetic, we have kinetic, and nuance is described as a subtle difference in shade or meaning, expression, or sound. So in this section, we'll talk about how we move similarly throughout time. Dance is to move rhythmically with music, typically following a set sequence of steps. And stance is defined as the way in which someone stands, especially when deliberately adopted, a person's posture. So I'll play a video here. The first example of dance is from the 1950s versus the 1980s. And this is Kenyan dancers versus African-American break dancers. And just take a look at this and see the visual similarities. Okay, is that playing well for everyone? Everyone still hear me good?
You're all good, friend.
Okay. Another example of kinetic Afrofuturism is this one here. This one includes a dancer by the name of Lil Buck from Memphis, Tennessee. And this video is from a dance that he did for Vogue magazine in 2014 versus Congolese dancers from 1950. And pay attention to the movement of the arms in this video. Okay. All right, next up, this is the 1920s versus 2020. So again, these are dance styles about 100 years apart. The Charleston is a dance popularized by a jazz artist in the 1920s, and this one is versus the Smees, also known as like the Chicago footwork style. And a lot of these videos are from like a viral TikTok craze with the dance, but just pay attention to the similarities in the footwork here. On the sound of my waist out, while she gripping on my piss out, she gon' fuck the night, this mess out, she gon' go. On the sound of my waist out, while she gripping on my piss out, she gon' fuck the night, this mess out, on the sound of my she gon' go. On the sound of my waist out, while she gripping on my piss out, she gon' fuck the night, this mess out, she gon' go. On the sound of my waist out, while she gripping on my piss out, she gon' fuck the night, this mess out, Okay, another example, this is 1980 versus 2020, a Liberian dancer versus a social media personality, Young Barbecue. She has, I think she just hit 1 million followers. She's had a lot of dance videos go viral lately.
Calvin Miller production. Toot that thing up, mommy, make it roll. Once you pop, lock it for me, girl, get low. If your mama gave it to you, baby girl, let it show. Once you pop, drop it for me, maybe we can roll. Oh! Pop, lock, and drop it. 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 Pop, lock, and drop it.
Okay. So another part of the kinetic aspect was dance and stance. So this particular picture highlights the similarities in positioning and posture throughout time when like taking photos. So here you see the men are positioned, one of them is seated and then the men standing behind him kind of getting support on his shoulder. And so there's a lot of similarities just in the disposition of these photos. Again, another example of similarities in posture and positioning with the two seated in the front kind of relaxed and then more individuals in the back. And both of these images are depicting like a group or like a tribe of people. Same thing in this photo. These are ivory harvesters from Zanzibar versus the Wu-Tang Clan. And again, it shows similarities in posture, even in leisure, kind of like with the hands resting on the legs and the knees and the folded hands and arms. And these are part of a series called Same Way, Different Day. Another aspect of that is aesthetic. So here we're talking about hairstyles, fashion, dress, adornment, jewelry, and things. So these images are decades apart, but you can also see the similarities in the shape of the hair, the use of braids, and the designs of like the Mohawk style. In a lot of indigenous African cultures, the men are the ones who adorn themselves more. A lot of times you'll see certain African tribes where the women are bald and the men are more decorated. There's still even similarities across the board, because here in America or in Black culture, the women do adorn their hair in different styles. So here you see like this asymmetric haircut versus like an asymmetric women's style. Again, the hairstyles were very decorative, very intricate, and a lot of them were directly related to identity of these people, as far as what tribe they were from, or their rank within their tribe, what family they belonged to, whether they were married or not. Those are all types of information that would be conveyed through hairstyles for indigenous African people. Here's another example of different similarities in hairstyles for both men and women. Even hairstyles and accessories like braids and beads are native to Africa. Here we have little Yachty, who has the braids and beads. That's one of his staples. And here we have a Bara tribe woman of Madagascar. And even the men during this time also wore similar hairstyles with the braids and beads. And you can also see he's also adorned with chains and jewelry on his chest. So a lot of people see things in hip hop culture and hip hop fashion and think that it's just a fad and not a well thought out, culturally significant display of Black culture. Here we have the 1880s versus the 1980s, again, 100 years apart, and you see the shirtless male with bottoms on, and then this braided kind of bang hairstyle, which 100 years later, Rick James adopted. And these influences don't just take place over centuries. Even closer in time, we're seeing these overlaps in depictions through Black culture. So here we have Rick James versus Young Thug, both wearing the black leather jackets with different adornments on them. They have both pushed the concept of gender roles and what it means to be feminine and masculine. And of course, they were both musicians that could be considered rock stars during this time. Both have huge cultural impacts. Even for women, you see Shaka Khan versus Meg Thee Stallion. They have similarities in how they've been depicted over time, where a lot of times women are depicted as strong, but still soft and sensual. Here we have Eartha Kitt versus Rihanna, both known as strong Black women, and here we have them both adorned in like the animal prints and the fur. Again, very reminiscent of Native African cultures where they do commonly clothe themselves in animal skins. So again, we're keeping in mind posture and positioning. Here we see them both kind of with the same poses here. Another example, Anita Baker versus Monica with the short haircut and the kind of seated poses. Here we have Diana Ross, who was very popular during the 70s, versus Ari Lennox, who is currently very popular, and you see them both depicted kind of glamorously with the exposed shoulder and the shiny earrings and the natural curly hair. Even similarities here in Dionne Warwick versus Tiana Taylor. And then here we have Whitney Houston versus Summer Walker, still very similarly depicted with a very soft touch in white shirts. And then here we have Angela Bofield versus Ella May. So again, these are examples of Black culture and Black aesthetics being perpetuated over decades, which speaks to the timelessness and the significance of Black people and the Black aesthetic. That kind of segues into the immense contributions that Black people have made to the world of beauty and beauty standards and the cosmetic industry, which is a multi-billion-dollar industry right now, considering brands like MAC and Sephora are making millions and billions of dollars off of recreating Black aesthetics, where people are getting lip fillers and doing things to make them have more Africanized features, not just in their face, plastic surgeries and things like that to kind of recreate the form and shape of naturally occurring Black women's bodies. Black people are the reason the beauty industry exists today. The popular looks of today, such as the smoky eye, arched eyebrows, and all of that derived from ancient Egyptian techniques. Ancient Egyptians invented mascara, lipstick, eyeshadow, mirrors, tweezers, razors, and many other things that we use every day for the concept of beauty. These are a few examples of ancient tools created by Egyptians for cosmetics. Here we have razors, tweezers, and even mirrors. These are tools that have been commercialized and are being sold for millions of dollars and make up this beauty industry that so often excludes Black and brown women from the concept of beauty. Another part of Black culture, the grill, which is like having gold and jewels in the mouth, is not just a symbol of status and fashion and wealth. It's another example of Black ingenuity and genius throughout time. Ancient Africans are responsible for a lot of the advancements in medical and cosmetic dentistry, even orthodontics. So some of the earliest examples of procedures such as fillings and dentures were practiced in Africa. Archaeologists have discovered mummies with gold teeth, fillings, and other adornments in their mouth. And sometimes gold brackets and bands were applied to teeth to keep them in place, which is pretty much the concept of braces. So all those things can be attributed to Black people. When you look at a rapper with a grill, it's not just a flashy fashion statement. It's also an example of our contributions to medicine and dentistry. So here are a couple examples of older, like ancient braces and dentures and things that were made of gold and metal forged by ancient Africans. So in conclusion, I just wanted to show you all these things to kind of give a perspective of the scope of Afrofuturism and how it exists on every level of culture, and how the culture of Black and brown people right now is being portrayed as a form of entertainment for consumption. However, it's very important that we shift our perspective on these things that are coined as ghetto and urban, and see them for the significance that they hold in just affecting the entire world. But that concludes my presentation. I'd like to open the floor for any comments or questions.
Wow.
Yes.
Thank you so much, friend. We have a lot of questions already coming up in the chat. We have people raising their hands, so please feel free to drop the question in the chat and we will certainly answer that. And if we're not able to get to all of your questions, I know there is a BSU Black Student Union meeting at 7 that some of you might want to get to. We're going to have a living document. We're going to save the chat, and then Jessi has generously agreed to respond to your questions. So we'll send out an email, and there will be a web address in the chat where you can find out more about our other workshops, and you can see the Q&A, get the recording, and learn a little bit more about our mural project and some of the things that we're doing at Pitzer. I just wanted to start with one question for this conversation before opening it up. And my main question is about intergenerational connection and community. Friend, particularly who in your life, elders or maybe young ones, people your age, have been your rock and have really guided you and supported you and given you that intergenerational nourishment to really feed your creativity and your brilliance today?
I would say my family has been my biggest inspiration on this journey as an artist. My career as an Afrofuturist started and was inspired by me studying my own family and the generations that came before me. My grandmother has kind of been the rock in that because she's kind of like the family historian. She has all the photos and documents and memories of our family. I also come from a big family. She had 12 children. So she's kind of just the matriarch of the family, and she's kind of like that source. She would know the family more than ever because she pretty much is the reason we all exist.
All right, thank you, friend. That it's always beautiful, you know, and it starts with grandma.
Mm-hmm.
And we give thanks for grandma. And I know we also share a mentor, Makeda Dredd, whom we kind of met through at the World Beat Cultural Center. So shout out to Makeda Dredd for introducing us and for just being an elder, a powerful elder and matriarch. All right, Q&A, here we go. Let's see what's in the chat, folks.
I had a question, sorry.
Yes, go ahead.
Well, actually I have like two questions. How do you feel about black women wearing like braids, dreads, like lace fronts and things like that? And how do you feel when black and brown women with big lips, like hourglass bodies, I guess you can say, get compared to people like Kylie Jenner, Kim Kardashian, and people like that who have gotten surgery to look like brown and black women? What's your opinion on that?
I believe in autonomy. I believe that people should be able to wear their hair how they feel. It's their decision. However, it is very important to know the history and acknowledge those things. Cultural appropriation is real. However, it doesn't mean that every white person who wears braids is intentionally trying to appropriate. I would prefer that certain cultural customs are reserved for the people that it belongs to. But I see that form of expression as an opportunity to have these conversations. As far as like the body modification and things like that, it's kind of unsettling because knowing that we are being demonized and made to feel less than because of our differences in shape and the things that actually make us beautiful and occur to us naturally, I think it's kind of a slap in the face, because you can go out and buy something that we naturally are entitled to from our just existence as Black and brown people. So yeah, in so many words, I think that Black stuff is for Black people. Whatever cultural expression should be specific to those people, but creativity leaves space for different people to explore different things.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I have a question.
Sure.
My name is Salek. I'm from Benin in West Africa. My mother's Fulani and my father's Batano. As you know, Fulani people are from like all over West Africa. But the Batano people originally immigrated from Egypt. The Batano tribe is the only tribe that like actually has horses that they're like equestrians in that region of Benin. So I just kind of, first of all, I just want to thank you for this presentation. It's like amazing. I love your work. You know, as an immigrant here and seeing a lot of stuff happening, I recognize a lot of these things, and like it's just fun. It's just funny to me sometimes when I see it. I'm like, oh yeah, that's really cool. Like, you know, we do that too. But you know, I think, you know, you can't really like lose everything, right? You have some things that are like in your genes that stays, and you just cannot lose everything. My question is related to Afrofuturism work, and like how do you think that it can reshape the negative idea of African culture and African futures, African culture, just in general, how we can reshape it here. I definitely think that it's already happening, especially because of the internet. You know, I see a lot of people like embracing their, you know, African culture, African heritage now more than ever. But how do you think that Afrofuturism can like actually even like expand that in general?
I think the essence of Afrofuturism is expansion, right? The power in it is that Afrofuturism takes away the constructs that society puts in place. It takes away this idea of space and time and who has access to what, and it just lets Blackness exist in any type of space. So I think interacting with Afrofuturism and seeing examples of Afrofuturism reshapes our mind to where we're not thinking of Blackness as something that's constantly navigating white supremacy. We look at Blackness as just a thriving organism and with endless possibilities.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Jessi, it looks like there's a question in the chat also, if you want to look at that.
Let's see.
Looks like there's two. There's one from Aditi and then one from Nadine Chan.
Okay, thank you for your presentation. Some of your work, e.g. Beauty by Nature, Natural High, and Jewels, have themes of nature and ecology. Could you please talk about the ecological dimensions of your work and how that works with the vision of Afrofuturism? Yes, so a lot of times I depict Black people coexisting and thriving with other forms of life, like flora and fauna, plants and animals. It's very important to depict Black and brown people in their natural environment, because removal of Black and brown bodies is such a huge theme in colonization. So why I try to include plants and animals is because those things are things seen as naturally occurring. A flower springs up where it belongs in its natural environment. So when you're able to reposition Black people and show them thriving and existing with the ecosystem around them, then you're able to think of it as a more holistic type of thing, and you start to see the codependency, the mutual relationship that Black and brown people have had throughout time with land and caring for animals. As he mentioned, in Africa, they're equestrians, and they have a relationship with the horses and the tigers and the birds in their environment. So I think the ecological standpoint is just another iteration of the expansive properties of Afrofuturism, because plant and animal life is always evolving and changing just as we are.
And I think there's one more question from Aditi. It might have been just above the last one.
Okay, how do you see these cultural objects, symbols, artifacts that are often tokenized or appropriated, reclaimed and appreciated in pop culture? How do you see a continuation of that embodiment of ancestors' dreams and visions, and how can that be sustained in longevity, especially for participants in a multi-ethnic state and members of the youth that have grown involved and integrated with pop culture? I think that these cultural objects, symbols, and artifacts have been tokenized and appropriated throughout history. That's a part of white culture, is the consumption of Black and brown culture. And I think it still rings true in pop culture, as it is dominated by white people. So I think it's very important that we recontextualize themes from pop culture outside of the scope of entertainment and consumption, and we start to place that that content and information in spaces like these, where we can talk about hip hop dances and all of these newer cultural expressions that exist now. And when we start to think about it, pop culture is just history happening now. When we start writing history, we're going to go back to the popular themes in history. The issue is that those themes have been Eurocentric throughout time. So when we shift them and we give importance to these pop culture things, that's how we let history rewrite itself.
Thank you so much. Sorry, I know it was a lot of questions at once, but I think you really dug into how also the commodification, consumerism, and capitalism converts a lot of these cultural symbols into products that just become assimilated into white culture.
Thank you for that.
And if I jump in, just riff on that. Currently, we just dropped a link in the chat that will have the recording and some ways to get involved, future events. And currently, I'm not sure if many of you know, but speaking of sacred symbols, sacred objects, the Etowanda Sage Fields, some of you in the area might walk around Etowanda Falls. It's a nice trail. Are actually currently under threat. Recently, our elders were notified that 800 pounds of white sage was poached to be commodified and sold as a spiritual cleansing tool from the sage fields, which is just in our backyard, Tongva territory. And so the call to action is coming up again. Our elders, particularly Vera Rocha, Tongva elder of this area, fought a good fight and was able to preserve the sage fields about 10 years ago. And now Tongva elder Barbara Drake and members of the Kushkatlan Collective, a local indigenous collective, are protecting the sage fields again. So if you want to help protect our sacred objects, please go to the blog and you can contact the contact info there, and we'll organize you and get you involved. And I just wanted to chime in because one of our elders, Julia Bogany, really drives home the fact that sage is a sacred object, and that you wouldn't go into like a church, a Catholic church, and just like walk in randomly and start taking like the holy sepulcher or like the wine or something. We're really trying to change the way that we see sage, and you wouldn't just go up to a random sage plant and take it. And that's kind of a way of cultural commodification and degradation of our land and our kinship. So we encourage you, if you want to do some environmental activism, letter writing, please go to that link in the chat. And then I also just had one question for you, friend. I noticed you did a really amazing job of putting your name on your artwork in each slide. And I just wanted to see if you would say a few words about protecting your work as a Black artist, and how a lot of times it blows my mind how many people try and steal your work all the time. And so, can you talk a little bit about how you have measures that you protect your work, ways that we can support your work and other artists like yourself, so that we're getting the original copies and we're not giving money and support to the fakes? We want the blueprint and the original.
Yeah, thanks. I do make sure to watermark or tag my artwork because it is very important in the essence of Afrofuturism in reclaiming our narrative and recontextualizing it. I think it's very important historically that when this information is shared, that it is known that it's a result of Black labor. Because again, the culture of white supremacy is taking advantage of Black labor and not giving credit. So I feel like just the spirit of being a Black and brown artist is making sure that historically we are making these ties, because we have been at the disadvantage of our disconnect for so long. Best way to support me in that is, again, by sharing my artwork with the tag, sharing it from my page. Instagram is pretty much my hub. It's a public space that a lot of people use, and I think it's the best way to make my artwork accessible. So Instagram, Jessi Jumanji. My website is jessijumanji.com. And again, just support me by sharing and, making that connection.
All right, let's see if there's any more questions in the chat. I see Trisha dropped your Insta, so thank you so much, T, for
Thank you.
letting everyone have access. Okay, I don't see any new questions coming in. Feel free to speak up if I've missed anything. Oh, here we go. What made you do this?
What made me do this presentation today with you guys? This is my second time here. Violet invited me last year, or was it the year before last? I always enjoyed being at the intersection of art and education. My art is nothing without educating myself and educating others. So I'm here first because I wanted to. I enjoy this space. And secondly, because I had to, because that's what I practice in being an Afrofuturist. It's showing up in these spaces where I can share my art and educate.
Looks like someone's asking, who inspired you?
I am constantly inspired by my ancestors, both known and unknown. Every time I open a book and read more about African people and discover more things that I didn't know or didn't know I knew, it's just very inspiring and humbling to know that I'm a part of a bigger whole that has so much that's yet to be discovered. So a lot of this is like, it's ancestral work for me, it's spiritual work, it's meditation, and it just fuels every other aspect of my life when I'm able to walk in knowing who I am and where I come from.
All right, one coming in. At what age did you start?
I would say I started my journey as an Afrofuturist around the age of like 19 or 20. I was doing a lot of introspection about my family and what it means to be part of such a huge family, and thinking about where's our history going and my position within this family structure as one of the younger generations upcoming, and I'll be a part of the older generation soon, who kind of ushers in the younger generation in knowing who we are and what our family has looked like over time. Um, so yeah, I'm inspired by all of that. Am I famous on social media? By numbers, maybe. I have about 70,000 followers on Instagram. I don't have a blue check yet though, so I don't know if that makes me not all the way famous. I do have a following, but I feel like they follow my artwork and my content more than me as a person. So kind of sort of famous.
Um, what is how can we educate others on topics like this? And what is the difference between cultural appreciation and cultural appropriation?
Um, Cultural appropriation is when you're actually taking these cultural artifacts or customs or significant things, and you're using them and applying them to yourself without aligning with the true purpose of it. Cultural appropriators, they do not let the culture exist and stand alone on its own and just appreciate it. Instead, they have to consume it or exercise it or exhaust it in some type of way. Cultural appreciation is observing culture, it's educating yourself on that culture, and it's sharing it in a way that doesn't center you because you're not a part of that culture. You can experience cultures without exhausting them.
Thank you.
Thank you. Great question.
All right, we have reached 7:15. So we will close out unless there's any last minute lingering questions has to ask. And again, if something pops up later, we have had a lot of information come our way. Don't worry, you can always reach out at the website. And
I'm Jessi Jumanji on every platform. Email me, follow me on Instagram, just reach out. I'll get back with you guys.
she's very easy to find. So please don't hesitate if things are bubbling up. You can always reach out and ask a question later on.
It looks like Ashley has a question that she put in the chat. I don't know if you want to answer that one real quick.
Being that you are clearly a reincarnated individual here to continue to archive and remind and reclaim our true history, how do you navigate the spaces as of today as opposed to those of which you came? Let's see. I see Black existence not linearly. I think they all overlap. Our past overlaps with our present, and our present overlaps with our future. So I try not to get caught up in one moment, because the Black experience is very multidimensional, and it's still happening as an extension from events from the past. So I feel like even though there's so much going on historically and culturally that's so important right now, we're in the middle of a revolution pretty much. It's important for me to still show up in that space, giving myself a perspective of the past, the present, and the future. Because in studying how we've overcome things from the past, I get a greater understanding of how things are happening presently and how those things can be projected into the future. And yes, all Black Lives Matter. Thank you.
Sorry, a last quick question. How can we educate others on not saying the N-word?
I would first say that that word is, if you are a Black person, it's completely up to you how you
Sorry,
use
who
it.
aren't Black?
Non-Black, there's no education in that. It's not a matter of education, it's a matter of awareness and tolerance. So there's nothing you can teach someone to make them want to stop using the word. You have to just make it known that it's unacceptable and it won't be accepted in your space. And hopefully if everyone is enforcing that same thing, eventually they'll run out of space for it. But it's not up to us to educate everyone who degrades us. So the first step in education is just being an example of not tolerating that behavior. And it's just as simple as saying, don't say that. I don't want to hear it. Don't communicate with me if that is how you continue to speak.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
All right, friends. Thank you. Let's give our friend Jessi a warm round of virtual applause, snaps, jazz hands, just our love, gratitude for all that you brought to us, this wealth of gems of knowledge and history and healing power that you brought. Thank you for keeping the fire going. Thank you for lighting our fire. And I look forward to following you and seeing what amazing things blossom forth in the months and years to come.
Thank you guys so much. I thoroughly enjoyed this space.
Thank you.